Hey guys, you think this new t-shirt here is a little wonky? Get it? Because this is the cover of the Orbital Wonky album on a t-shirt. It's cool. Now I have two Orbital t-shirts. That's nice. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old, and today it's time for the last year end list. Oh, 2017 is finally behind us. Yeah, it was bad. But it wasn't all bad. This was the year I started to put most of my effort into this channel, and more than doubled my output. Sure, I had to deal with Depeche Mode and Savant fans, the latter in particular were pretty terrible, but by this point I feel like I've just gotten used to it. And as I've said, there were fan bases that genuinely surprised me. Once again, mainly Erasure fans. I also got get well soon wishes from The Orb when I was in the hospital at the beginning of this year. I made a Steely Dan tribute video that got 70,000 views over the course of just 1 week. I did 2 collab reviews with Landon remixes and appeared on the Mad Sounds podcast. I came out with my own 6th mainline album and another minor Bandcamp compilation. And also, Matthew Skutnik, an old Flash developer I'm a huge fan of, started playing my music in the background of a couple of his live streams. You know, not precisely huge stuff, but I feel like it's always good to count my blessings every year, you know? So now it's time to count down what I thought were my favorite releases of the year. This was a pretty interesting year, I'd say, for electronic music. Last year, basically all of my picks were artists who were already well established, and I was expecting to make the list if they dropped at all. And I kinda knew what my number 1 pick was going to be for several months. Here, though, there were a lot more picks that came from artists I was previously not familiar with or aren't that well established. A lot of the big established artists and big anticipated albums I thought I was going to love turned out to be disappointments overall. Some more than others, looking at you, Fortet. But this was a year where I explored a lot more new music and artists I never would have checked out otherwise, and this is even my first year doing this where my number 1 pick wasn't blatantly obvious. Awesome. So, let's get into that. Disclaimer, it's obviously all just personal opinion, and this list only has electronic albums because I'm the electronic guy. Quick shoutouts to some non-electronic albums I was into this year. Steven Wilson, To the Bone, Big Crit, Forever's a Mighty Long Time, and even though I only listened to it like twice, I'll also give a little shoutout to Fully Involved Learned Helplessness. Not the kind of music I typically enjoy, and I really can't pretend like this album sounds good. But I enjoyed all the songs themselves, if that makes sense. You know, support your fellow YouTubers, guys. Mark for Mad Sounds. So yeah, without any further ado, let's get into the top 10 best albums of 2017, specifically the electronic ones. So before we get into the list proper, let's do some honorable mentions. Honorable mention number 1, Carbon-Based Lifeforms, Derelicts. This had some disappointing aspects, and I don't consider it the best work they've ever done, but hey, I was glad to have these guys around this year. Delivered a solid project here. Honorable mention number 2, Shpungle, Codex VI. This has some disappointing aspects, and I don't consider it the best work they've ever done, but hey, I was glad to have these guys around this year. Delivered a solid project here. Wait. Okay, this one kind of has the opposite problem from Derelicts. That one didn't sound interesting enough to distinct from their other stuff, but it was catchy. And this one wasn't catchy enough, but sounded really interesting. And obviously I enjoyed both enough to put it on the list regardless. Honorable mention number 3, Oneohtrix Point Never, Good Time soundtrack. Great film soundtracks are hard to come by, but this one hit just that right balance of being, you know, perfect for the film, and being easily enjoyable out of context, so boom, made it on the list. Check it out. Honorable mention number 4, Safi Brothers, The Quality of Being One. Yeah, this didn't quite make the list. Repeat visits didn't have as much value as I thought it would. Often ended up feeling a bit too long for its own good. But regardless, this was a ridiculously great sounding trance chill out outing that I'm very glad I sat down with. Also, shout out to Safi Brothers member Gabriel Lamar and his new album Flashin' On, which I had a very similar reaction to. All good stuff you should check out. Honorable mention number 5, 256 Pi with Spiral Out of Control. I'm just kidding. I'm not the kind of insane egotist who would really honestly put his own album on his own year-end list. I am, however, definitely the kind of insane egotist who would shameless plug said album in his year-end list, so go check it out if you haven't already. Support your boy. Actual honorable mention number 5, Jaywalk, Limelight Nights. Didn't have enough to say on this one for a full video, though I wanted the opportunity to talk about these guys one more time without baiting people via Chainsmokers jokes, since this album completely caught me off guard and came out of the blue right at the end of the year. I had no idea these guys were still making music. This isn't as great as A Night on the Rocks, which I now have a CD of, but it's not super far behind. Enjoyable for all the same reasons I like the other two Jaywalk albums. Very nice, chill atmosphere and good hooks. Maybe the production is a tad cheap sounding here, but weirdly enough it gave me some throwback to this old PC Frogger game that I used to play as a kid. Some moments on here, particularly Twilight, remind me of that soundtrack. I still think these guys are super underrated regardless, and go check them out. All 3 of their albums. Honorable mention number 6, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, The Punishment of Luxury. All my problems with this one I mentioned in my review still stand, but I do think it is interesting that I remember the tune to basically every track from this thing, so yeah, that's a good sign, I would say. Honorable mention number 7, Elon Moore, Long Awaited Journey. Okay. This album is freaking insane. Packed with so much detail and texture, grand, epic, full-on orchestras, and weird but super detailed IDM textures that are more on the BT side than anything. This thing is impressive on another level. In fact, it flows more like a film soundtrack than an album. So many of these tracks have no defined structure, it's super interesting. I was actually planning on making a video on this one before the end of the year, but I decided against it, and the main reason is that the entire thing was so insanely dense, I felt like I couldn't wrap my head around it and parse my opinions in time. I'm probably gonna make a video on it in the near future. I think that's gonna be one of the first 2018 reviews. But in the meantime, definitely check this thing out. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Right, and with that, now it's time to get into the list proper. Number 10. Gas, Narcopop. This was one of the more interesting picks of the year, a new discovery for me personally. I'd been recommended to Gas in the past, but only this year did I actually start to listen to him, and I was pretty impressed with what I found. There is so little to Gas's music, not the kind of thing that I feel like I could typically speak in depth about or do a series on, but something about the whole atmosphere of Narcopop just really captivated me. The orchestral tones gave this whole thing a really haunting and spooky atmosphere that I haven't really got out of any other albums, really, and I've been returning to it a fair bit. The other Gas albums not as much, as they weren't going to be in consideration for a list like this, but I really am starting to feel like I could use some more Gas in my life. Number 9. LCD Soundsystem with American Dream. Yes, LCD Soundsystem, the one pick that people are most likely to recognize if they've not clicked on one of my regular videos before, and also the one that people are most likely to disagree with. I definitely get the criticisms that people had of American Dream, hence why it's only number 9 on the list. It's kind of a retread for these guys, nothing particularly original, and it's certainly not better than Sound of Silver in any capacity, and I accept that, but the fact of the matter is that I've just always really enjoyed listening to James Murphy, just having his personality around. The guy is always a ton of fun and a pleasure to listen to. I was disappointed by a lot of comebacks this year, as I said, some of which were even mentioned earlier in this video, but this was definitely the one that I could most easily overlook the flaws. LCD Sound System has always delivered ridiculously fun listens with their previous material, and American Dream was no exception. Even with my problems, I still had a ton of fun with it, and obviously found enough value in it to put it here. Number 8. The Polish Ambassador, Color of Flight. This one is fairly low on the list because after I reviewed it near the beginning of this year, I completely forgot about it and didn't come back to it once until looking through possible honorable mentions for this list. And yet as I was going through the honorable mentions, I realized this kinda needed to be on the list. There was always some minor issue I ran into with the runners-up, something that bugged me that prevented me from putting it on the list proper, but when I re-listened to Color of Flight, I had a great time from start to finish and started to wonder why the hell I wasn't putting it into heavier rotation. I love how this guy has managed to find his own take on the whole, combining world music with electronic music without sounding like a ripoff of other artists like Spangle and Banco de Gaia. He found a much more danceable sound that was more unique to him specifically, and I really think it's one of the best things he's ever done. This was a good reminder for me to put the Polish Ambassador into rotation a bit more often, and I would definitely recommend this one if you missed it, even if you're not a TPA fan yourself. Number 7. Eric Taxon, Winter Beats. When will my time run out? I'm losing memory. This one snuck in at the last minute. Never expected to put an obscure Bandcamp artist from my YouTube private messages on my list proper, but here we are. Eric Taxon had 9 releases in 2017 alone, including one that came after my review of him called Cicada. Pretty enjoyable ambient release there. I'm all over the place on his stuff. There was some stuff I really liked and other stuff I wasn't really feeling, but I will have to give this dude credit, A, for his work ethic and constantly reinventing himself. I mean, no releases I heard from him sounded alike. And B, for this release in particular. I mean, it does pander pretty heavily to my personal taste in dance music, but it had enough substance to keep me interested despite only being one 37-minute track. It juggled various different styles, it was consistently catchy, and it just really puts me in a good mood anytime I've listened to it. Wondering if maybe this might have been even higher on the list if I'd bothered with it when it actually came out back in August, but whatever. It has pretty consistently stayed in rotation since my review dropped, and it's definitely a keeper for me. Can definitely see this one following me out of 2017. Great job on this one, dude. Keep it up. Number 6. Bonobo with Migration. The first album to come out in 2017 that I reviewed. When I covered this all the way back in January, I thought it was really good, but I didn't expect it to be material for this list. But my god, this album has turned out to be surprisingly influential this year. After reviewing Four Swords' Compassion and finding a lot of rhythmic, melodic, even vague stylistic similarities, and then Odessa's A Moment Apart and realizing a similar concept was there too, every time I was reminded of what Bonobo did this year and found myself coming back to this album. It never really got the chance to come out of rotation all year, and it's been steadily growing on me. I've now really grown to love this thing. I still don't think it's on par with Black Sands, but every track on here has managed to stick with me on this thing, especially Second Son, and thanks to its January release, it's almost certainly the album I listened to the most this year overall. So for that, it's made it on this list, and I'm sure it'll stick with me in the coming years, just like many other Bonobo albums before it. Number 5. Spunkshine with The Most Distant Machine. I know not many people stuck by for my review of this guy, but Spunkshine played a much bigger role for me in 2017 than I ever would have expected. This dude has always been a complete enigma to me, and I've had no idea how to properly get into his music for years. That is, until this album came out and everything started to fall into place. I think this is Spunkshine's best album overall, honestly, not only among his most professional sounding, but also just the one in which he did the best job of crafting this sort of moody vibe. The first 3 tracks in particular just bringing me back in over and over. But there's more to it than that. At one point this year, a film student who just happened to go to the same college as me contacted me to interview me for a documentary she was making on Spunkshine. The interview ended up not happening, but my review of this album still made an appearance in the documentary. Apparently I'm actually an important part of his progression as an artist, which is kinda mind-blowing to me. On top of that, one day not too far from when I was supposed to be interviewed, I had like an acid reflux attack while walking around downtown. It was pretty painful and scary, and I put this on, and it calmed me down enough for me to make it home perfectly alright. In a way, I guess you could say Spunkshine saved my life. Even though I don't think I was actually in a life-threatening situation there at all. Point is, this album is really stuck with me, as has Spunkshine's other music. He's officially entered into my rotation since my review, and I would definitely recommend checking the guy out. And the documentary too. You can find the link to that in the description, so yeah. Number 4. Clark with Death Peak. Clark is another one of those names like Gas that I'd known about for a long time, but only this year actually bothered to listen to his music. And I don't care what anyone says. I know I've only been a Clark fan for a few months now, but by this point I'm fully convinced Death Peak is the guy's best work to date. His juggling of various styles in a completely seamless fashion, the particularly cinematic and dramatic vibe this album had that made it feel like a crazy derailed train ride, and yet it never compromised on its accessibility. This album was mind-blowing on first listen and continued to keep me totally on the edge of my seat and 100% invested on every subsequent listen. Like few other albums I've heard, maybe ever, this one isn't just a keeper for years to come, it's an album that truly exemplifies what electronic music is capable of and why I've devoted myself to the genre. This thing is a freaking masterwork, and I even consider it for the number 1 spot. Yet somehow it's only at number 4. Yeah, the competition for that number 1 spot was ridiculously stiff. At the end there were other albums I had more of a personal connection to than this one. I don't feel like I'm at the point where I fully adopted Clark's music as a part of my life. But that doesn't change the fact that this was one of the most impressive and insanely fun listens I've had all year, and you should definitely pick this one up if you haven't already. Number 3. Goldie, the Journeyman. Goldie is definitely an artist that has tested me as a critic, shall we say, and as a person, to be honest. Despite how I may feel about the man himself, though, the fact remains is that I was absolutely in love with this album since the very first listen. It was my favorite album of the year, until obviously the next 2 picks came in later. It was one I even felt compelled to go out to the streets of London to record my review, which totally wasn't just a coincidence. Goldie now has a trilogy of amazing double albums to his name. You got the classic Timeless, the experimental Saturn's Return, and now you got this sentimental celebration of Goldie's past. 16 tracks and never a dull moment on this thing. Going from his typical style of chill drum and bass to weirder, more experimental stuff to the many emotional ballads to even these cool jazzier pieces. Nearly everything on this album was executed flawlessly, with Goldie creating another fantastic listening journey from front to back. At this point, I don't think I need any more Goldie in my life aside from the 3 albums I've shown, as if he decided he didn't want to make another album after this, I'd be totally cool with that, since this would be a great send-off, and now he's basically got that perfect trilogy set up, and I would very highly recommend all 3 of those albums occupy a space on your shelf like they do on mine. Right, and now for my top 2. Let me tell you guys, these 2 were so freaking close that they may as well be a tie. I loved them for very different reasons, but I almost equally want to shout out both of these albums' praises from the rooftops, but I felt like making them a tie was the easy way out. So I had to decide on a ranking. And here's that ranking. Number 2. Sounds from the Ground. Native Soul. Right. I figured SFTG were going to make this list regardless of what they put out this year, given how over the past 6 or so years they have so consistently been the band I look to whenever I need to unwind, and given how exhausting this year was, this was a very frequent occasion. I nearly listened this album into the ground in the past 3 months since its release. As far as chill-out albums go, this is damn near perfection. It capitalized on so many facets of all the different styles they've explored over the years, yet it brought just enough new ideas to the table so as not to feel like a complete retread. The production was completely pitch perfect and there wasn't a single note that felt misplaced. And most importantly, this was an album that touched me emotionally in a way that SFTG haven't since high school. Native Soul played so perfectly into my personal tastes, and even if not every idea on this album was something they hadn't explored previously, it felt like an album that, if they wanted to close their career out on it, I feel like this would be a good send-off to them. Even though I've never gotten the indication that they were going to stop after this. I don't know if this was on par with their best work like Mosaic or Luminal, but goddamn, it's up there. This is an album that really solidified why I considered SFTG to be basically my all-time favorite down-tempo outfit, and I have nothing but massive praise for these guys. They did it again, and somehow impressed me more than a lot of their already impressive previous albums. But in the end, they were still only my number 2 pick. Because, as close to me personally as SFTG are, I felt like Native Soul was kind of a safe pick. Like I said, they were basically going to make this list regardless of what they released. My number 1 pick wasn't one I expected to form that strong a personal connection with me, so without as much fan service to my personal taste, it had to work that little extra bit harder to make it this high up on the list. And thus... Number 1. Coma Duster, Solace. I really don't know what else to say about Solace that I haven't already. This album's damn near perfect. And yeah, I said that about Native Soul, but I mean that just as much here. This album aimed really high and hit right on where it was aiming. Even if I do tend to prefer more down-tempo material over more aggressive stuff like this, I can't deny that this album still won me over wholeheartedly. Every track is either catchy or personally harrowing in its own right, usually both. The production is insanely epic and perfectly executed. There's a complicated science fiction concept that required a long PDF package with the album to explain, and somehow it didn't feel overblown or pretentious. No, it fit perfectly with the music. And despite the story about such large-scale things as the end of the universe and that kind of thing, it doesn't feel inhuman. Far from it, the guy put a lot of raw emotion into this thing, linking this story into his own struggles with mental illnesses. And it's all well conveyed and even relatable. Yes, really, I found this album about the end of the universe and metaphysical bodies relatable. Sure, he already had a first album that sounded pretty similar to this and was similarly impressive sounding, but this follow-up was better refined, it was more succinct, and it formed a better personal connection with me. The fact that this was basically all achieved by one guy only makes it all the more amazing, so for that, I've decided Coma Duster has the best electronic album of 2017. And that's the end of the year-end lists. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.